Today's video is going to be about the Spanish Star Z70B. This is an open bolt submachine gun that was primarily used between the 70s and the 90s. These are often a very overlooked gun. I mean, I know the tube style submachine guns obviously called that because they have basically the entire body, just a large metal tube. These were a dime a dozen. I mean, every country was pretty much putting out at least one of these. I mean, even the British, we had our Sterling submachine gun. So these things, they were a dime a dozen. They were mass produced. Often they were cheap and they were crude. Some of them weren't so effective. This one, however, I would say it's in the upper end of the spectrum. It's got some pretty nice features to it that a lot of the other like cheaply made submachine guns at the time just didn't even have until at least 20-30 years later on. So this little gun, as I said to you before, it's open bolt. The bolt on this one obviously doesn't lock back anymore, but obviously what you would have done, you would have cocked the handle back, the bolt would have stayed open, you pull the trigger and then it's fired from that position. Open bolt submachine guns, they're easy to produce, they're somewhat reliable, they can be a little bit finicky mind you, the rate of fire is incredibly high on them, but they're lacking in accuracy, and a high rate of fire can more often than not actually be a detrimental thing really. I mean, you give one of these to a green-faced recruit who doesn't have that much combat experience, they get themselves into a firefight, what are they going to do? Whack it in auto, hold down the trigger, and next thing you know the mag's empty. It was actually more effective to have a bit of a slower fire rate so you'd have more controllability, but that was just one of the downfalls really with an open bolt submachine gun. Sometimes they try to get around it by having a much heavier bolt inside. This would slow the rate of fire down. They'd also try to increase the rate of travel for the bolt so it actually has further to go back. These obviously slow a rate of fire down, but then they make a submachine gun a lot more bulkier than it needs to be. So it's trying to find that balance. So as I said before, these were actually pretty competent little guns. In comparison to what was being fielded by a lot of countries, especially poorer ones, these were a significant step ahead. Unfortunately though, these all suffered the same fate, because when Heckler & Koch introduced the MP5, these pretty much became irrelevant overnight. Star suffered quite significantly because they were hoping to get these exported to many countries. As I say, when the MP5 came out though, that changed everything. Yes, it was more expensive, the MP5, but it was just that much more effective. The quality was through the roof. It was a closed bolt design, it was much more accurate. I mean, it could be set up in many different configurations and it was reliable as hell. So they were pretty much adopted across the globe and they still are today. This unfortunately has been forgotten about now. You never really see them in films, games, any common media. They never seem to be referenced to anything. I mean, one of these was actually featured on Forgotten Weapons, so it just goes to show just how obscure this little thing is. So it fires from a 32 round double stack magazine. They actually seem to be fairly decent little mags. This can't fire anymore, so don't worry about it having a loaded mag. But yeah, the magazines actually seem to be pretty damn effective. A lot of the magazines on these things, some of them were even single stack still, or some of them were so woefully awful. I mean, I believe that was one of the main issues with the Sten gun, was the magazines on them were just so hit and miss. It was hard finding some that actually matched up with the gun, that actually worked properly. But this little submachine gun though, it did its job well. It was just really a victim of the MP5 as so many other submachine guns were. It did have a folding stock on it, but it was obviously nothing to write home about. You'd have to remember, even though you will get some more stability from this stock, it's still a very lightweight open bolt submachine gun. The sight picture, it's incredibly crude. I don't know if you can see that well. So this really was just a short range spray and pray really. I mean, it wasn't the smoothest shooter, but definitely it wasn't the worst. But in comparison to the MP5, this thing just could not compete. So yeah, that's just my little show and tell really of the Star Z70B. You don't really see many of these anymore. D&B Military have got some in stock if you're interested in getting one. I'll just bring the stock down again, see if I can give you a better sight picture. That's probably the best I'm going to be able to do on camera. But as you can see, this is strictly for close range shooting only. One point I did want to quickly add on to this as well. I did recently find a video of Spanish military They were doing some drills with this little submachine gun, and interestingly enough, they were firing from the hip. Now, I've never actually seen that being really used as a military doctrine. I mean, it can't really be that effective unless the person is quite literally in front of you. I mean, you imagine you're firing from this position. I mean, you don't really have the magazine capacity, really, 32 rounds. So once you've initially fired off a burst, and you've then sighted in where those bullets are going, you've probably only got about 20 rounds left in your mag. So it's a really desperate last-minute tactic, if you were to ask me, just firing from this position. I thought that video was a little strange. I just thought they might have been, you know, just showing off to the general public just because it looks cool, and around that time frame in all the movies everyone was hip firing, so who knows, it could have been that. But yeah, that just concludes my video on this little piece. Cheers for watching.
El Star Z70B, de fuego selectivo y en el mismo calibre, es el subfusil de dotación normalizada, independientemente de que algunos grupos hayan dispuesto de ciertas unidades del más moderno Z84.